It's a journey to educate India's forgotten daughters. That's what this book is. It's by the Magsaysay Award winner, so definitely the credentials are there. And Safeena's work, it happens to be in the same place where I learned all about it.
Mhm.
There are villages in this which I have been to, and that's why I was keen to come today and introduce the book. So Safeena started her life way back on the foothills of the Aravalis, where I started my school transformation work. We were perhaps maybe some kilometers or maybe even less than that, but we didn't know we both were doing the same thing. I was outside the walls of a school. I was in the hedge of a school because the school where I went to, there weren't any walls, and there aren't still. The school can't do the CBSE's requirement of a wall around the school because it's 17 acres of wilderness. So you can't wall wilderness. So I don't know how they will continue in the current scenario. But the whole focus of that school was every child should be able to read. So my journey started in the Fab India School, village called Bali in 2012. Safina's journey starts about 2007 and 8, where she discovered that she must get the children of the tribals and the people of that area to school. So we both started in a district called Pali. Maybe please open the book now. Thank you, Brinda.
Yeah.
Advanced praise. Safina Husain's journey reveals the quiet revolutions unfolding in India's most forgotten corners, where a single woman's courage can tilt the nation towards justice. Her work in bringing back girls into classrooms is not mere service, it is the reclamation of dignity and the shaping of a civilizational future. This book moved me deeply and reminded me that the destiny of our country is written in the dreams of its daughters. That's Banu Mushtaq. She needs no introduction. Another person who recommends the book strongly needs no introduction is Rohini Nilekani, chairperson of Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. In every last girl, Safina Hussain shines a keen and compassionate light on the last girl at the first mile of development. By working closely with the local Samaj, the community, her organization, Educate Girls, has succeeded in creating a societal mission to help those Antim Balas become Pratham Balas. Antim Balas, last girls, Pratham Balas, first girls. The first girls in their families to be educated. This is how positive exponential change begins. Do read this book, Brenda. Enjoy yourself.
Thank
Bless.
you.
Over to you. And Brenda, don't be the last girl.
Thank you, Sandeep, for that introduction. And we shall start. Sandeep mentioned the district of Pali and the Fab India School. I happen to have been to that school, I think at least maybe three times on different occasions. I'd gone there to see the school, to interact with the teachers there, and to work with the teachers over there when the school had just started. And it was a very humbling experience for me. So I can very well imagine what this book is going to be about, because Pali is such a small little town. When I asked Sandeep, how do I reach that place? He said, you can go by train. A train stops at a place called Falna in in Rajasthan, and the train stops precisely for 2 minutes. So you get off the train, and then you have to travel towards Pali. So that's how I went to Pali, and that was a different experience altogether, where the Fab India School came up, and as Sandeep rightly put it, that was educating again the children of rural India, but in a very different kind of a circumstance. Now we have Safina Hussain doing different kind of work. So let's get into the reading. And as we read her story and the story of those fortunate girls who came across Safina will unfold to us also. I have never met a girl who said to me, you know, I want to stay at home. I want to graze the cattle. I want to look after my siblings. I want to be a child bride. Every single girl I meet wants to go to school. So we have the content and let's read the preface. It's important because that gives us a lot of the intent of the writer. India is a land of contrasts, my father used to say. As a man in the tourism business, his job was to show India to groups of tourists who arrived from all over the world, from the US, the UK, Europe, and sometimes as far off as Japan, South Africa, or Trinidad. He loved his country and wanted people to not just visit monuments, but really understand its history, people, culture, and complexities. My father would say it is incorrect to think of India simply as a country. It must be viewed as a subcontinent, the country with the highest population and largest democracy in the world, seventh largest land mass with 22 official languages and hundreds of dialects. This is an India for everyone, he would declare, as if performing on stage. Here we have a story of innovation and progress. Yet, there is also a story of struggle and exclusion. From this, let's gallop into the 21st century. Now, India has luxurious five-star hotels, and tourism remains a buoyant industry. Yet, it is also a land where people sleep under plastic sheets. It has the world's biggest middle class and a growing number of billionaires making their money in industries like pharmaceuticals and software, along with one of the highest population of people living below the poverty line. India stands shoulder to shoulder with only 31% of UN member states that have had a female head of state. Over 150 women were directly or indirectly involved as scientists and engineers in India's space mission to Mars. And we have seen several prominent female chief ministers and leading bankers, including one of the top positions of the Reserve Bank of India. Women can rise to the very top in India, and yet we remain blighted by low female literacy rates in many parts of the country. Our education system is also a place of contrast. On one hand, we have some of the world's premier state funded tertiary education institutes like the Indian Institutes of Technology and Indian Institutes of Management, many of which appear on lists of the world's top 50 institutions. Their alumni are the who's who of the Silicon Valley. On the other, we have one of the largest number of out of school children in the world. This dichotomy can be hard for people to understand. It can feel jarring to outsiders. While India is rapidly changing and growing, there are still corners of the country where girls' education is a challenge. This book takes you to those far off corners. It is not to deny or take away from the progress the country has made since independence, but instead, I want to shine a light on the areas that we will need to work on. This is a story of concentrations and hotspots in deep rural remote areas where girls are still denied their right to an education. But what about the boys, you may ask? While girls are disproportionately marginalized, there is no denying that boys are out of school too. During the pandemic, I lived in a small village with my family for 8 months, teaching tribal children when our schools were closed for 2 years. I saw firsthand the tremendous challenges that young boys faced as well. On the first day of class, I asked all the children to draw a picture of how they saw themselves. Kavita drew herself in a flowing Cinderella dress, and Vijay drew himself as a stick figure standing next to a red car and a house. He proudly explained his picture to me and told me how he knew what it was like to live in a house that had walls even though he lived in a hut. One of my favorite students, Nitin, drew himself in a clean formal shirt with red buttons, shorts, shoes, neatly combed hair, and a tiffin box with lunch and fruits in it, he explained. He saw himself as a man of education and was desperate to seek it. In class, he was serious and thoughtful. First to arrive and settle down, last to leave. Like a sponge, he wanted to soak in everything we said or did. He could read most letters, but was still struggling to string them together into words. Sometimes I walked him back to his hut after we finished. A dwelling built so low that you had to bend almost to your waist to be able to enter. I met his mother too, a strong tribal lady who worked as a laborer. Hard labor. She suffered from rheumatoid arthritis and on some days would be in debilitating pain. One day, with no warning, Nitin stopped coming to class. I went by the hut and was told that his mother had gone with a contractor to work on a construction site in Bangalore, hundreds of miles away, and Nitin had been taken by his uncle to work in a coal mine. Hard child labor. Boys face hardships due to poverty too. It really cannot be denied that boys need an education and support as much as girls. I recognize that. In our work with Educate Girls, as we go door to door to find out of school girls, we also check for boys. If they have dropped out, we enroll them too. Our foundational learning program that we run in grades 3, 4, and 5 in government schools, teaching Hindi, English, and math, includes boys too. Our programs impact and benefit all. But when we design, we keep our eye on the last out of school girl, meaning the symbolic Antim Bala. Just like Arjun in the Mahabharata only saw the eye of the fish when he shot his arrow, we see and design with keeping the out of school and most marginalized girl at the center. No overthinking, no distraction. Our firm belief is that when you design for the most marginalized girl, you benefit all boys and girls by unleashing the curb cut effect. This curb cut effect was demonstrated beautifully by American civil rights attorney and civil rights advocate Angela Glover Blackwell back in 2017, who also coined the term. It was the disability activists in the 1970s whose actions inspired the idea of creating curb cuts, ramps of concrete that join the pavement to the road, a bridge for mobility of wheelchair users. Simple. But as it turns out, studies showed that they didn't just benefit those with disability, but also mothers with strollers and delivery men who had to wheel around large crates, people with wheelie suitcases, runners and skateboarders, all headed for the curb cut. Girls' education also has that powerful curb cut effect that helps boys. However, if you don't design through a gender lens, the default option may not work for girls. This book is born out of my experience and journey of starting and growing Educate Girls. In a world historically designed by and for men, we design for the very last girl, but in doing so, design for all. This book is from that gender lens. It focuses on Antim Bala, the last girl, and her reality. Women and girls hold up half the sky, and this book is a call to action to not leave any girl behind. We want to see everyone in India thrive and see the country thrive as well. And the good news is, we know how to do this. But this is not a story of attribution. We have not managed any of the progress we have seen in rural India over the last 18 years on our own. The Educate Girls movement is just that, a movement powered by funding partners and the government at every stage. I founded Educate Girls back in 2007 with a team of passionate individuals whose own lived experience, coupled with mine, made a huge contribution to our mission. However, this is not limited to my and the team's effort, as none of this would have been possible with the 30 plus partnership agreements we have signed over the years with the state governments where we work. The partnership and the championship we have seen from government leaders and bureaucrats gave us the wings we have needed to fly and the license and legitimacy to operate. From my pivotal first meeting with a certain Minister for Human Resources Development, who gave us our very first partnership in Pali, to our ability in one of our new states to go from zero to a full fledged technical assistance unit in the government, in under 3 months, the government has walked this path with us. The latter successful partnership was initiated because of a social media post that was picked up by a journalist who introduced me to the top official at the Education Ministry who got his team to talk to my team in the space of 24-hour period. You might challenge the speed, this reality, but sometimes things like this happen, just like this. And government partnership has to be a balance of tenacity and long term thinking with an impulsive, seize the day mentality. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time can help you turn some of the biggest corners in your journey. What a beautiful thing. And finally, this journey would not have been possible without a relatively modest group of bold funders who have dared to dream big with us and over the years continue to support our ambitious plan for girls. You know who you are. This group of individuals, with the support of the organizations they run, have invariably all been to Rajasthan, met with our girls, knocked on doors, sat with our teams, and truly lived and breathed our work with us. And in doing so, they have believed or at times suspended belief as we have taken decisions and increased the depth and reach of our work year on year. None of this would have been possible without their support, the fuel, the thought partnership, and the trust. Although we've had a head office in Mumbai since 2008, our work truly happens in India's villages. Villages I have visited many times each year throughout our journey. The years often blend into one another, and it is the seasons I remember. The heat of the May sun, the anticipation of the monsoon in the air, or the coolness of January mornings. Every year follows a similar cycle. The initial contact with the village and the door to door survey, followed by the enrollment campaign, then work in the schools and ongoing visits to families still struggling to enroll their girls. Most of the stories I'm about to share are from our first 5 years, largely in Rajasthan. But since 2015, I've met girls across the states of Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Bihar. And even today, I continue to uncover stories that sharpen our arguments and illustrate the challenges we and our girls still face. I feel compelled to share. I invite you all to join me as we delve into the story of Educate Girls, and it begins like this. Introduction. I was lying on a rug in a circle of strangers. A shaman was leaning over me as a waft of intoxicating herb infused smoke paused by my nose long enough for me to breathe it in and relax even further into the hard ground. She wore an embroidered crimson and white dress, and her long beaded earrings, adorned with feathers, like a couple of little dream catchers, moved in front of my face hypnotically. I could feel heavy, isolated spots of warmth on my chest and stomach. the hot stones. I see you in education, she whispered close to my ear, and then louder to the group. She will work in education. That was my first and last experience of a healing stone ceremony in Puerto Escondido, Mexico. And it was a prediction that I had put out of my mind for many, many years. Even when a pushy young journalist met me around 6 years later, none of this came back to me. Why? The interviewer demanded somewhat abruptly. Why did you decide to work in girls' education? He asked. It was 2008, and he had come from the local paper wanting to interview me regarding Educate Girls. We were sitting in our first head office in Oshiwara, Mumbai, barely which was 300 square feet, housed in a small building that faced a slum. As one climbed to the fourth floor, their footsteps echoed up the stairwell almost musically, and the walls were unceremoniously dappled with pawn spots. Sometimes you encountered small empty booze bottles and a mound of cigarette butts in the corners. While the building was small, dilapidated, and dirty, our office was neat, clean, and well lit. Sitting at our tiny four-seater conference table that also doubled up as a place for lunch, I remember being deeply irritated with this question. I tried to tell him that I worked in girls' education because it was an important cause. I tried to nudge him in the direction of how we do our work, telling him about our impact and how it changes girls' lives. He tried to ask me the same thing a few times, but seeing how I was being so evasive, he finally gave up. Immediately after he left, I remember sitting with my team and expressing my frustration at his persistent questions. Who was he, this assertive young man, in his smart pressed shirt, a pen and comb peeking out of his top pocket, and a scruffy notebook in his hand to ask me all these questions? Why was he insisting on knowing this detail? How was it so important to him or to his readers? Why didn't he ask me only about my work? But later, on my way home in the auto rickshaw, I reflected on it. I thought more about his probing question. Why did I want to do this work? Why was this mission important to me? More importantly, and perhaps the bigger question, why did I not want to answer these questions? Why was I so irritated and agitated by him? Why was answering a personal question so hard? Looking back now, I think it was still too early for me to articulate it. It was some time later that I was able to admit the personal reason behind my work. And many more years had to pass before I could say it aloud and allow it to be heard. Even today, talking about myself and my own connection to our work is hard. And the conversation always starts with a hard, painful lump in my throat and ends with an overwhelming feeling of shame and vulnerability that makes me want to crawl into bed and hide. I do this work because of the role education has played in my own life. It took me a long time to gather the courage to say that I grew up around hardship, poverty, violence, and abuse. Due to the trauma I experienced as a child, my education was interrupted for 3 years. How could I begin to describe to an interviewer, a stranger, not just the darkness of my childhood, but the 3 years of self loathing and failure staring me in the face? 3 years of hearing family, friends, and relatives sympathize with my father and stepmother, saying, Poor Yusuf, he is having such a hard time with his daughter. The hushed tones, the conversations behind closed doors. 3 years is a long time in a teenager's life. Time moves slowly for you whilst it races for your classmates. You remain sitting at home while they are graduating from university, and planning their next steps. Life is moving forward for everyone but you. And so it would have continued and perhaps even ended in marriage if I hadn't managed to escape. Marriage, according to my relatives and my father's friends, seemed to be the only route available to me. She should settle down. But I was very lucky. A family friend stepped in and took me to live with her. She was a beautiful woman from Lucknow, barely 4 feet 8 inches tall, but enormous in heart and compassion. She opened up her home to me, made a place for me in her family, and gave me the unconditional love and attention I so clearly craved. She reminded me years later that when I moved in with her, I weighed almost nothing and looked sunken, hollowed out like death warmed up. Not only did she fill me up again with the love and stability I needed, but also gently built my aspiration and confidence to return to the classroom. With that, I got back to education and ended up studying at the London School of Economics, becoming the first in my family to go overseas for education. My renewed education trajectory changed my life. People who had written me off, who were so sad for my poor father, suddenly saw me differently. From being the useless daughter, I was now a smart young woman. More than anything, beyond what anyone else thought, I saw myself differently. The day I walked down Horton Street, past the Wrights Bar, and into the old building for my first lecture in the new theatre, I was a changed person. I hated myself a little less, held my head a little higher, began to find my voice and confidence, and gained a tone of experience living independently and studying in London for 3 years. After I graduated from LSE, I did not wish to go back to India. I had been thriving away from home. It felt too soon to give that all up and go back to New Delhi. So I moved as far as I could to the other side of the world, to San Francisco. There, I got an entry level job at a software startup in 1995 that was making a 3D web browser. But I stayed on the job for less than 9 months. I started volunteering for Bay Area nonprofits. And in a short space of time, it was clear that this was where I was meant to be. I ended up working in the social sector within a year of leaving college. It was here that I found my home. From a volunteer, I moved up to a full time job to lead a health nonprofit. I scaled their work from one program in Ecuador to 5 countries, including Mexico, Bolivia, South Africa, and India. It was a heady time for me. I had lived in India all my life except for the time in London for university. This was the decade I explored the world, working in Quito, Cuenca, Manta, and deep in the Ecuadorian Amazon jungle with the Shuar tribes of the Pastaza province. I worked in the indigenous areas in Puerto Escondido, in Oaxaca, Oaxaca province in Mexico, and in South Africa, spending time in Cape Town and Durban. This was a decade of learning how to build an organization, lead teams, raise funds, and understand grassroots work in the most remote and tribal areas in the world. It was while I was working in Oaxaca that my colleague at the time, Betsy Fuller, and I had been lured to a remote village from that prophetic healing stone ceremony where the shaman had announced that my future would be in education. Her words had been so confusing to me at the time. I had never thought about education as a career. My own education had been patchy. I had no skills or interest in that area. Betsy and I laughed all the way back to the town. I regaled her with anecdotes from my childhood. How, because of all the challenges at home, my report cards always said attendance irregular, while I stood first in my class and was a prefect in high school. In fourth grade, my rank was 27th in the class of 55 plus, 50 plus, and how I managed to start university only at the age of 21, where all my classmates were barely 18. We laughed off the prophecy as mumbo jumbo and forgot about it until 15 years later when Educate Girls was receiving a big award and I was preparing to go on stage. I was in Oxford to receive the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. My family were in the audience. My phone was in my pocket, and just before I stepped on stage, I took it out to make sure it was on silent and saw a message from Betsy. Good luck. Go for it. Remember what the shaman said, reminding me of where it all began. But as I said after the meeting with the shaman, I had brushed off the idea of working in education and went back to my work in community health. And it wasn't until 2004 that something changed. The majority of health centers I visited in my work were located in South America, but on one particular day, I found myself back in India for a relatively brief trip. I had landed 2 days earlier and passed through my native place, New Delhi. During my formative years, the sprawling, low rise city had been my family home, and it was where my father still lived. We hadn't seen each other for a while, and he didn't want to let me out of his sight. I was now his smart, educated daughter, who he was genuinely very proud of. So I agreed that he could accompany me on my work trip to the mystical foothills of the Himalayas. We had already been in the car for over 8 hours when we reached the outskirts of the village and abandoned the car in order to continue on foot. It was meant to be a typical journey where I was keen to stare aimlessly out of the window and catch up on some sleep. But my father had other plans and grilled me about San Francisco, my work, and when I was going to come home. Array, Daddy. San Francisco is my home, I replied. Work is good, life is good. Jane bhi do, let it be. The road to the village snaked up the mountain and shortened the travel time to a quarter. The mountainside was overwhelmingly steep, and the village was hard to make out as it was hidden in the trees. Only the temple was really visible, with a white steeple molded like icing on a cake and an orange flag just above the canopy. As my eyes adjusted to the verdant slope up to the left and stepped agricultural fields back down the hill to our right, I became suddenly aware of punctuating flashes of crimson, magenta, and mustard yellow as a group of veiled women in saris appeared from their houses and approached us along a narrow lane. Once the group had arrived, one of the more confident women greeted us with deference. We introduced ourselves, and then she turned and asked my father, somewhat forwardly, how many children he had. Here she is, my only child, my everything, he said, gesturing towards me. His arms were open, and he wore a smile that concealed nothing and revealed everything. Pure love and pride. I smiled too. But on turning back to the woman, I saw that some of them had started crying. They expressed deep sorrow for my father, as if it was a curse to have a daughter as your only child. Kitna boj hai. What a burden was their solemn conclusion. You are still young, they told my father. You can try more. A man must have a son, they advised. I was left with a hollow sadness and a reminder of the social pressures I had experienced myself as a girl. How can sadness be attached to the life of any child? What had those women experienced themselves as little girls? I asked myself. What pressures were they under in their extended families? In that very moment, my life changed. During our visit, it was clear that none of the women in the village were literate. Our community clinic was set up with that in mind, in the knowledge that the women who will take all the decisions in their families about their own and their child's health would not be able to read, would have restrictions on their mobility, and would likely suffer from a wider range of health issues linked to poor nutrition, limited access to hygiene and sanitation, and both mental and physical abuse. And why? Well, because they were women. Being born female is dangerous for your health, is how my old mentor Anne Firth Murray put it. As a professor at Stanford University and the founder of the Global Fund for Women, she spoke with wisdom and experience. On the car journey back down the mountain and through the plains back to the capital, I reflected on the fact that I might have been born in that village. It was just a matter of fate that I was born to my mother and my father in New Delhi rather than a village near Mussoorie. It was fate that I eventually managed to complete my education with the help of my aunt. Why was I living in San Francisco and running a health non-profit when these women were not able to read their prescriptions? They were but the same age as me. We grew up in the same India. But I because of my education. They were who they were because they had been denied their education. That day sowed the seed for Educate Girls. By 2005, I was back in India, choosing Mumbai to make my home and start thinking about my plans. But this journey from Delhi to Mumbai via London and San Francisco was not something I was able to share with the interviewer that day. It's now been 18 years since I started Educate Girls, and it has grown from a handful of team members to thousands of full time employees and tens of thousands of village based gender champions. In those 18 years, the team, in partnership with communities and state governments, has mobilized over 2 million out of school girls to bring them back into the classrooms and supported learning outcomes for 2.4 million children, boys and girls. During these 18 years, I've stood on the doorsteps of families from tribal communities, sat with girls, met with officials in government education departments, negotiated with data scientists in shiny Silicon Valley offices, and addressed crowds on stages in rural towns. I've also experienced and witnessed the impact of gender based violence. I've been exposed to the reality of what it is like to be born a girl in certain communities in India, knowing that thousands of girls don't survive and aren't even born. But this is not a problem just of India, it is a global concern. Women's rights are human rights. Human rights are women's rights. Hillary Rodham Clinton declared forcefully in 1995 at the fourth UN Conference on Women in Beijing, in what is now seen as a watershed moment in the women's rights movement. And this is exactly where we begin this book as I start to explain why girls' education matters and why it is every girl's right. How long is this chapter, Sneha? Does it end at this page?
No, ma'am.
It goes on?
This is
Oh, it ends here. So I'll read it. It's just going to take a few minutes. The world is made for the educated. Please turn to the next one, Sneha. The world is made of for the educated, and without an education, you are unlikely to know your rights and are much more likely to be open to exploitation and exclusion. If you live on the margins physically, economically, and socially, um, there is a high likelihood that you will remain uneducated. But more than that, if you are then also born a girl in a world that is by and large made by and for men, then your life story is invariably written for you. Your story is written for you through a lens of disappointment. Your story is written from a mindset that values a girl less than a boy. It is a mindset that keeps girls out of school, and yet it is a school and a quality gender transformative education that will ensure that more girls are not denied the education that is rightfully theirs. The solution lies in the problem itself. Education begets education. In this book, I would like to rewrite the story for the girls I have met and for those I haven't. And through my story and the story of Educate Girls, the organization I founded, I would like to explain why I and why we all need to educate girls. This book is also about the problem of girls' education, but it is also about the potential of girls' education. By reading it, I want to give everyday readers hope and a sense that something human and fundamental like girls' education that doesn't require any new inventions, doesn't require rocket science, can ensure that we all survive and thrive. We know how to do this, and I can and will explain how. How gender champions are coming forward from the most remote villages, men and women alike. How technology is helping us find hotspots of out of school girls that still exist despite huge progress. How data is driving our work, and how slowly but surely mindsets and behaviors are shifting, and a movement is being created that will stop at nothing to fight for girls' rights. We have 17 Sustainable Development Goals declared by the United Nations in 2015. But we also have every last girl to find and empower through education. If we do that, those 17 goals can become one. Our oceans, our health, our forests, our safety, our democratic rights, our ability to survive and thrive, they all become one fight with one solution, which is to educate every last girl. And so the story shifts to rural Rajasthan. Dot on at 6:15, Sneha.
Yeah.
We finished the first two, the preface and the introduction, and we will dive into the actual story from the next week. I hope all of you enjoyed the book. I think I found it profoundly touching, and I think as we read every chapter, we will find individual stories of girls, which is really going to make us um, wonder and realize how very lucky we are to be where we are. Right? Thank you so much for attending today's session. Please spread the word. Ask your friends to join us to simply read and feel the joy of reading. That's what we want to do in the Thursday session. Just read. And when we don't get into all these discussions and all, we're going to read more. And let's hope that we will move and graduate from book to book. Thank you. Have a good evening. And let's meet again next Thursday.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye
Thank you.
bye,
Thank you so much,
everybody.
ma'am.
Bye.
Good evening, ma'am.
Thank
Bye.
You. Bye
thank
bye.
you. Thank
Bye,
you so
everybody.
much, ma'am. Bye bye.
Bye.